Hello, everyone. That's loud. You said that.
No, I can't.
Okay. Is that good? Hello, everyone. I'm Richard.
And don't.
I am sorry. I'm not doing this presentation. I'm not Anusha. I'm up here because I'm running for Illinois Student Government Vice President along with Sam, who's running for President. Our platform is to defund the ISG. And as funny as that may sound, we're very serious about it. We're gonna get rid of the government and funnel the money to engineering ourselves. So if you like what you hear, go to studentelections.illinois.edu and vote for me, please. Thank you.
Shout out Richard. Okay. Let's go. All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome. AI hacking with me. Cool. Announcements. So first thing, we're playing live SIGPwny tomorrow. Hi, hello, everyone here should come play. It's going to be so much fun. We're playing virtually for most of it, but if people want to play in person, we can also do that too. I think it'll be a great time, and it's a good way to put all the skills y'all have been learning this semester into practice. So please join. If you can't see the live CPF stuff, there's like a channel in our servers on opt-in. And that'll give you the CPF role and mean that you can start playing with us, which is super cool and everyone should try it. Cool. We have no meeting next Thursday. It's a break from our regular schedule because 20 of us will be off to SIGPwny. So if you're in the SIGPwny group, hi, hello, and excited. And if you're not, next year. Cool. Also, we have a feedback form for this semester that y'all should fill out. A bunch of the admins are doing a research paper on how SIGPwny helps educate students. And we need as many responses as possible from y'all because that's how we get our paper done. So the link is in Discord, but it's also up here and it'll be on the slides when we post them. So yeah, please fill it out. I expect to see responses from everyone here. Cool. All right, meeting flyer, it's here. I will explain what it means for people who don't get it later. But for people that do, and also irrelevant XQCD assignments. Cool. So quick overview of what exactly this talk was. Can I go back? I can't go back. You're good. I can also like wait here. I don't mind. Cool. Does anyone else need more time with the meeting flag? It will also be at the end of the presentation, and this won't take that long. So cool. All right, what is AI security? Why am I giving you this talk, this presentation? Who even am I? Hi, hello, I'm Anusha, I'm the current president, if you don't know who I am. And AI security can mean many different things. So I'm going to be covering like today's meeting is a bit of an overview for all of them, what I mean and what's going on in the current space. This Sunday's meeting will actually be going more into CTF style content or what this means from like a practical perspective. How can you hack AI, right? But what is AI security, first of all? So it can be a couple different things depending on who you're talking to. First one is using AI for security purposes. So this is your AI for malware detection, AI for networking treatment. All the stuff is covered under AI for experts. There's also exploring the security of AI itself. That's a lot of what I research, and it's a very big field of research now. But it's, how can we make AI more secure? How is it already insecure? And just exploring that. And the third one is like AI ethics or the security around AI. So it's the security of your AI systems. How can we make them more fair? How can we make sure that we're not using data that we're not meant to be using or data that's bad for us to be using? All that stuff is covered under AI ethics. All these are awesome fields, and I will be covering all of them in some depth today. But be aware that it can mean different things depending on who you're talking to. And you just have to kind of clarify your terms when you are talking to people in this field, because that makes things more interesting and it makes conversations more nuanced. Cool. So the first kind of broad section I'll be covering is AI for security. What does that mean? What is it? So a lot of it is AI for malware detection right now. So it's how can we scan things to find intrusions, right? So this is your typical like security job, but we're trying to use AI to kind of help the people in that job to some degree. So using AI to find malware and shut down execution. So like it can scan code that you're running before you execute it and see whether or not it's malware and maybe inform the user, is this malware? Maybe it is. Maybe you shouldn't be running it. Maybe we don't trust this code that you downloaded off the internet. Or AI for network monitoring. So it scans packets to monitor for attacks, right? And like AI for XYZ, like it can be applied to many different things. These are the fields I know of that have like a lot of research going on currently. But pretty much anything that requires human like foresight or monitoring to some degree, people are trying to apply AI to it because it can mean that we are more responsive to attacks, or we discover attacks before they happen and not afterward, even though the code is new or it's some new attack that maybe humans aren't aware of yet. But an AI is much better at pattern recognition than we are and pick up on something before something bad happens. Cool. Pros and cons of this, from my perspective. So good things, there's a potential to find undiscovered malware and patch it. So like if there's a new bug that no one's found, or that no one's looking out for, maybe an AI that like scans all your code for malware will be able to detect that. But a human isn't on the lookout for this and won't be able to. Or discover bugs before they can be exploited. So like AI for that like checks your code for security bugs before you ship it off to production. Or continuous monitoring without continuous human involvement. So an AI doesn't have to sleep, right? An AI doesn't it doesn't like need anything that like it does. And it's autonomous. So for things like 24/7 monitoring, an AI would be much better than a human or a team of humans, potentially, if it's good. But the bad things, what happens when it misclassifies, right? What happens when it says this program that's doing real good things is malware? It might be bad. It might not do anything. Maybe you just like rerun the program and it like magically just determines that it's not malware. We don't know. And this is like an ongoing area of research. So like it's, this can happen, but what happens when this does happen, it's up to kind of how the program chooses to do that. It's also black box. We have no idea how it's potentially like classifying things as malware, right? Like this isn't like you can't like AI in its current form isn't explainable. Like you can't like look at a model and be like this specific line of code is causing malware. So that might be bad. And does accuracy generalize to the real world? If you train something on like, this is code that's malware, this is code that isn't, does that work in the real world? We don't know. It may not. And that's again an ongoing area of testing. Cool. Second big area. This is the area that I'm passionate about, so this may be a little more in depth, and this is also some of what we will be covering on Sunday. But it's the security of AI, right? So this is how, like, a lot of this is finding ways to make AI models behave incorrectly on purpose. And that can take many different forms based on the models you're looking at, and we'll go into some of that later. But a keyword here that is relevant to my field is adversarial. So adversarial attacks, adversarial input. It's how do we behave in ways that are normal to us, or at least unsuspicious, but they get flagged by the AI in some way, or they do something, or the AI produces output that is bad to us. There are many different ways to get models to misbehave, again, dependent on the type of model. Like a large language model and like a generative adversarial model are two very different things, right? And so the attacks on them will look different. But small differences in input can completely change output, right? And like if y'all have played around with ChatGPT or like Midjourney or something like that, you will have seen it. Like two different, like very similar prompts to again, they produce very different results depending on what you change. So that's always something to keep in mind. Cool. So the first large category of attacks are LLM attacks. An LLM is a large language model. This is ChatGPT, this is GPT-3, GPT-4. I'm naming a lot of GPT models because those are the ones that everyone knows. Large language models, right? So the biggest field of attack that everyone here has probably seen is prompt injection. How do we get a large language model to go past its like current filters, right? Like, can we get it to hotwire a car? How do we get it to hotwire a car? Is this good or bad? These are all like, again, this is a very new field. Like LLM attacks are not nearly as popular like a year ago, right? Because this is an updated presentation. So like this field changes extremely rapidly. And so people are always figuring out new ways to prompt inject or new ways to defend against it. So like this is a very active field of development. But prompt injection or other attacks have been popularized by like having open access to ChatGPT, because as soon as people saw that there were filters on it, everyone was like, haha, you know what I'm gonna do? Break them. What's up, Pete?
Yes, there's a collection of these prompts. If you go to jailbreakchat.com, they're really funny. You can paste them into GPT. Yeah.
Very cool. Yeah, no. So if y'all didn't hear it, and for the people on Zoom, it's jailbreakchat.com.
Yeah.
Cool. So if you go to that, there's a collection of really fun prompts. These may or may not work, because some jailbreak prompts have been like in later iterations of ChatGPT, they have been filtered against, right? So like some of the earlier prompt injections no longer work, because again, this is a very active field of development. And it's also like one prompt injection may like on one large language model may not necessarily work on others, because they've been trained on different databases, they've been trained in different ways, their model architecture was different. But it's definitely a very interesting thing to look at, is how does adversarial input to a large language model work? How does what does like bad output look like, right? Like these are all questions that we are coming up with answers to. And these are some other questions that like are currently being answered, which is how can we make LLMs behave? What does that look like, right? Can we gain access to unsanitized output? How is that bad? And what are the harms of everything? And there are actually some really cool demonstrations that I have access to, that y'all may have access to soon, that kind of start dealing with this. So for example, this was recently released at South by Southwest, but with the organization that I work for, which is it's like letting people just do this, right? Whereas we get access to unfiltered GPT models or unfiltered LLMs, and you get to play around with them, and it's what does that look like? Like how can we produce output? So come talk to me if you want to know more about this, or if you're interested in attacking LLMs. Cool. The next big area of attacks is attacks on GANs. This is generative adversarial models. This is your midterm, right? This is your stable diffusion. And these are things that produce images given some set of input. It can be like pictures, it can be like a series of words, whatever. Like they're all very differently implemented, but they're all GANs. So are there ways for images included in a dataset to poison the outputs of a GAN? This is a very recent area of research. But basically, I don't know how many of y'all know, there is a large section of like artists or like people who don't want their images included in a GANs data set, right? So people came up with ways and the other forms of research around this to try and have like people who don't want their like artwork included in the data set for a GAN can like maybe do something to their artwork to poison the data set, and now the GAN no longer works, which means that you should have asked for permission if you wanted an unpoisoned image in your data set, right? So that's one large section of research, is kind of around like privacy ethics, or not privacy, but like who owns your image, right? Who owns artwork? Who owns images that you post to the internet? How do we collect data in ways that are ethical and fair to the people that originally own the data, right? And so like stuff like data poisoning research may be able to enforce ethical collection of art. But it's definitely an area of research, right? Which is like, if you have a data set, how can you ensure that your data is unpoisoned? Or what does poisoning look like on a data? There are also, similar to LLMs, there are people looking into how do we produce unsanitized output on GANs, right? Like, can we produce gore? Can we produce other things that are maybe not the best images for GANs to produce? Well, what does that look like? How is that dangerous, right? Or like, for example, can we use GANs to create like disinformation? Like give it an open access GAN. That's probably bad, right? But like, if there are filters on it, how do we break those? How do we prevent people from breaking those? These are all questions around GANs and the ethics surrounding GANs that are important to someone who works in security, right? Because you're trying to deal with people trying to break kind of the rules you set or the filters you set. But yeah, I think Blaze is a really, really cool research paper, and I have it linked, but everyone should go look it up. It's out of like the Sand Lab in Chicago, and I think it deals with a lot of really cool questions surrounding the ethics of like data sets, and around GANs in general that I think have been hotly debated, given the public release of GANs. So yeah, definitely cool research to check out. Cool. The last big area I'm going to be talking about is detector or classifier attacks. So this is your object detection. This is your classification. These are like what a lot of people think of when they think of like, you know, AI taking in image input, and it's actually the field that I work most closely with right now. But a lot of questions deal with how can we change the input to like a detection or classification model to make it misclassify, right? So for example, this is something that's out. Where it's like given facial recognition, right? So it's like it's taking in images and trying to find faces. Is there a way to prevent facial recognition from scanning your face? So Fox is another it's another research output by the same lab that did Blaze, actually out of Chicago. And they use adversarial input on faces. So it's like you can take a picture of your face, put it through this, and it'll add adversarial noise. And in theory, it should no longer be detected by facial recognition models, right? So this is an area of security where it's like, are models vulnerable to this? Or from a privacy perspective, how can we create more tools like this that will allow me to have privacy over these models that are scanning images that I may have no control over once I post them to. There are also there are a ton of papers in this field. It's a very large field. It's probably the oldest of all three that I mentioned, at least from my perspective. But again, it's the one I know the most about, so maybe it's the papers I'm looking at. There are a lot of papers that deal with adversarial inputs on these models. How do they produce altered output? For example, another example that I'll give you is how do we make self-driving cars crash, right? Because a lot of them are using AI to some degree to like scan traffic signs or, you know, like be on the road in some capacity to the other drivers. So how do we, like, are there ways that a malicious actor can, like, you know, put a sticker on a stop sign and suddenly your car is speeding up instead of slowing down, right? That's a security problem. That's a massive security problem. And so it's a large area of research. And there are a lot of really cool papers, a lot of them out of this from professors at this university, actually. So if you are interested, and I think it's a very interesting question, come talk to me about it. It's really cool. Cool. The last, oh, what's up?
Oh, can you back to that slide?
Yes.
Do you know if there's like any instances of that have already happened, like in the wild?
So not really. Again, these are all really new areas of research. Like within the past couple of years, papers have come out. And I think I like, you know, these attacks haven't been really seen in the wild, thankfully. But it's still something that people are trying to mitigate against to some degree, just because if it does happen, that's really bad.
You know, like what Tesla they're doing to like prevent against?
A lot of companies that work heavily with AI have started employing people who work specifically within this field, to kind of like look at their models or like have conversations about the security of their models. Beyond that, I'm personally not really sure. I know people in that field at various industries who probably be better suited to answering that question. But like beyond like employing these people to like, you know, figure out their stuff for them, I'm not personally sure. Okay. The last kind of big area I'm going to be talking about is privacy preserving AI. And I promise, like, I will, like, after this, there's like 2 more slides, and then I can answer like any question you'll have. But privacy preserving AI, what does that look like? So there are kind of 3 main ways you can have AI that preserves privacy, right? Where it's like on the data collection side, how do you select proper data sets? How do you collect data sets ethically? In the case of GANs, right, it's how do you, like, would you be asking like artists if you can use their art, right? So like that's an ethical question, but it's really important because having these big data sets is the foundation of all AI. And then on the data processing side, it's can we make training data more private, right? Where it's like, I have all this data, but what do I do with it, right? Like, do I have to attach like all this data of someone to their name, or can I just have it be anonymized, right? And these are all questions that are important when you're training AI because they impact the features you say. And there's also an architecture side, which is how do you build your model in ways where it can allow for some privacy, where it's model federation. So it's like decentralized data. So, one company doesn't have like these giant data sets that contain everyone's data, where it's, you control your own data, and then the AI figures out some way to anonymize the stuff it's learning, and it gets better over time, but a company doesn't necessarily have your data. Or model and learning, where it's, how do you forget? Like, if someone wants to opt out of being in a model, can it forget what it's learned? And how does that impact privacy? Again, very big questions, very current questions, very important questions. And I will also talk to you all about that if you want. Last thing, career paths. This is something I just talked about a little with Pete's question, but what happens if you want to go into this industry? So the first and biggest area is research, right? These are all really, really active questions. And a lot of them have like, the landscape changes from year to year. And so research is one way to stay very, very current with kind of how do we mitigate these problems? What problems are there to mitigate, right? And so you can either be like an industrial research scientist within a company. So like, Microsoft or like NVIDIA will have these like research scientists whose job it is to produce research that may be useful for the company. And a lot of like stuff coming out or about this field is coming out from these research scientists. You can also stay in academia. So like you could stay at U of I, and there's a lab here that does a lot of papers and does a lot of research based around all these concepts. You can also be an AI engineer who is well versed in AI security and maybe works with AI teams to kind of build products that are more secure, or have taken these questions into mind in designing AI systems. And last but not least, this is a newer thing that's happening, but AI red team. It's a really specific team at a lot of big companies where your job is to attack models or and like see what like security issues they may have. Some companies are even doing more specific red teams, where it's like you are an LLM red team now. And I've seen those roles pop up because companies are starting to respond to kind of the security issues that people have seen in response to things like Midjourney or ChatGPT. So yeah, definitely really cool security prospects, and I'm excited to see how the field develops. Cool. Feel free to ask me anything. I will open it up to questions. Next meetings, companies line CTF with us. That's literally tomorrow. Y'all should come play. This Sunday will be AI hacking again with me. So you're stuck with me for another meeting, but it will be more hands-on. I'll try to get challenges up, and I'll kind of go into like the actual code behind some of these attacks and like what they look like from a real-world perspective. Not sure yet. We will figure that out. I'm not sure how many people are going to be playing in person. Worst case, ECM room, there are always friends that are, yeah. And next Tuesday we have no meetings in the second half. Here's the flag. I'm now open to questions. If no one has any, we can also just like be done. I don't mind. But yeah, thanks so much for listening to me, y'all. What's up?
Personally, based on your experience, what is the one potential security flaw or existing security flaw in the models that you consider to be the most scary?
Ooh, most scary. So again, I especially like my current area of research is a lot more on the detection and classification side, where it's like I'm looking at security issues from within that. For me personally, it's definitely the idea that there is a small, like there are ways to attack models with that are related to safety critical features. So I've actually done research on self-driving cars, where it's like, how, and I've read a lot of the research on self-driving cars where like these models may be vulnerable to like attacks on like graffiti attacks or like something where they just like misclassify a stop sign, or like, something else on the road and they accidentally kill someone. And we're already starting to see that happen a little bit with like the like self-driving becoming like a bigger thing. Like y'all have probably seen the news reports of like Tesla car suddenly veers into Meridian and kills 2 people type stories, right? And those are scary because like, yeah, they're accidents, but what happens if something goes wrong from an AI perspective, or if someone figures out some like random hack, or something, or like some like very specific combination of inputs that can cause the same thing to happen. And I think part of AI security is also figuring out how to make AI better, where it's like given that there is this hole or like this something that is vulnerable to, how do we make the AI stronger, in terms of like less resistant to like misclassification or like being bad at XYZ tasks. So for me, it's definitely like AI within safety critical features.
Just to elaborate on what George and you just said, how do you make a model more resistant to these kind of attacks?
Yeah, so that's actually something I'll get into a little more on Sunday. But for an overview of my stuff specifically, I can kind of get into how like a very simple attack works, right? So for a classification model, basically you can give it altered input that to us looks the same, right? So it like, it'll be a picture of a dog. And to like a human eye, it's still a picture of a dog. But an attacker has added in random noise that means that the model now reads it as something else entirely. And it shouldn't, right? Like a perfect model that looks at things the same way we do would still see it as a dog, but because it is an AI model and looks at images very differently than we do, well, for some definition of looking, it misclassifies, right? And so one way to mitigate these attacks is to actually show it these altered, like, or in your training data set, you can have like slightly altered pictures that like basically tell the AI to disregard like certain levels of noise. And like, again, very active field of research. So people are currently discovering newer and better ways to make an AI more resistant to attack. But this is one of the most commonly like accepted ones, and it's been like a pretty large field of research, where it is, like how does robust training is what it's called, impact models. And for those of you who were around my UIDTF chow, at Tony's Place, that's actually the way that I have like a ground truth for my challenge, was to have a model that was resistant to the types of attacks.
Does that mean that like AI models are always like one step behind the most current attack? If you have to like, so I guess I'm hearing that you incorporate like the latest like attacks into the training set.
Yeah, so yes, no. Like to some degree, I think so. At least with the current way we mitigate attacks, like you have to kind of have some like base level, like, oh, I know what the noise is, or I know what the attack is. At some degree, I think like these very basic attacks, like they will change the image that you're submitting so far that like it's not really an attack anymore, it's just a different image. So like those attacks become kind of useless. But like again, this is a really, really new area. Like when I say new, like academic papers come out within the last 2 years type beat, right? So like that's new in terms of like figuring out what exactly is going on. So it just really depends. And that's specific to like detectors and classifiers, right? Like LLMs are their own beast, where it's like these attacks may look different, and their like mitigations may not even be from like a model level, and maybe like what restrictions are put on chat, right? So it's very different based on like what area of AI you're looking at, but for my area specifically, to a degree, yes. What's up?
How much of a difference have you seen in the AI realm, like pre-chat GPT versus like post-chat GPT and all the hype and popularity that surrounds it?
A large amount, in that a lot of people became very interested in LLMs. Because like even a year ago, like large language models were not as popular, right? Like not many people were like, on the AI hype train necessarily, but now everyone and their mother is trying to get like some version of ChatGPT into the world, right? where it's like, Bard is a thing now, and Bing is using like AI and stuff like that. So I think like a tool like ChatGPT is very good at popularizing it. And I've also like started to see like jobs specific to large language models, where it's like you are now an LLM red teamer for a company. Because like people are rightfully concerned about like what security for that even looks like. And like how they at their company that may start using LLMs would deal with security concerns. So I think it has shifted a lot of the landscape of what AI and AI security looks like. The same thing happened when like GANs were like a big thing, not that they aren't now, but like when something like Midjourney got released, where it's like these like massively open access new tools like shifted the landscape of like what people knew in terms of AI. So people start getting excited, and then everyone starts getting excited. But I definitely think it's like a really cool thing to witness, just because it definitely pushes kind of the boundaries in a massive way once everyone is like trying to be like the next big thing. So I think it's like a pretty neat time to be around AI to some degree.
Oh,
Yeah.
Mid first and then B. What's up?
Okay. So going back to like the OpenAI. So like OpenAI like recently like released their like public API, and so that's like GPT-4, and a lot of companies are now like implementing chatbots, like literally Discord
Yeah,
is like a
yeah.
cloud AI. I know Snapchat, like if you pay like for their premium thing, you'll get like an AI bot. And even GitHub Copilot is now like being upgraded to include specifically OpenAI's API.
Right,
So, and Microsoft Bing also uses OpenAI.
right.
So do you think that like with everyone relying on OpenAI's API, is that better for security than having like multiple popular language models, and everyone's kind of doing their own thing? Or do you think that what OpenAI is doing by like kind of getting everyone on their API, is that better for security, or like?
I think they're like to a degree there are less security concerns from like an LLM perspective, in that like it's this very tightly controlled model that like he's like people have access to. Again, to be clear, like as a disclaimer, I don't work with LLMs at all, so this is my personal opinion. But I also think that like it has a degree of concern to me, where it's like if say there's something bad that happens that like this model is quote unquote vulnerable to, right? Like say for whatever reason, that like everyone's chatbots now have this like weird hack that like may become popular. So I think it has like good things and bad things for security, like most things that rely on this one really specific API. So I don't think it's like unique to AI per se, but I am kind of excited to see how that develops and whether people start training their own AIs. Because the other thing with that is making your own LLM that is that good takes a massive amount of compute. GPT-4 is, however ungodly amount of hours of like CPU, like GPU usage to kind of get to that point. Like however much data that they use, I don't know the exact specifics, right? So it's a lot harder to create your own competitor. So I'm not sure we'll be seeing like a ton of like competitors necessarily soon. I can think of like one research group that is like trying, but besides that, I don't really know people who are. What's up, Pete?
Oh, well, on your previous thing, did you hear about like the llama model or whatever?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, that wasn't trained with compute, right? That was just trained on like the responses from ChatGPT.
So I'm not entirely sure if I don't think that was trained from scratch. I'm not entirely sure necessarily because I haven't really looked into the llama models. But it would still require like a degree of compute, probably a pretty large one as well. One was on Facebook.
I think it might have been Google or.
Big company, insert big
Facebook,
company
sorry.
here, okay, it was Facebook. So like, I know their research team does have access to like a decent amount of compute that they probably use. Especially because a lot of companies are putting in a ton of resources into becoming like up to date with LLMs because they've realized how popular it is. I am hesitant to believe that a lot of them will be good, because a lot of them are pretty like put together last minute to kind of try and get on the AI hype train, in my opinion. But we'll see how well it does.
Do you think that, or I guess, if my understanding of the model was correct, they used like, I guess, the OpenAI API to train their model in some fashion. Do you think there's ever like a possibility that a model trained in that way can achieve like similar performance to the original model?
So, yes, I do. And funnily enough, this is also another area of security as well, is given an API access, can attackers like get your model? So it's like, maybe it's trained on private data and you don't want it released or something. And I think there's been research showing that it does. I don't really know much about the llama models, specifically, so I would be able to like, I'm relatively sure they've published like, benchmarking compared to stuff like OpenAI's models. So that's probably a better answer to your question, to go find that research paper.
Oh, my original question was, like, since everyone's relying on OpenAI's like APIs for like chatbots and everything, and I feel like right now there's like a lot of like just trivial like jailbreaks or like prompt injection
Right.
attacks. Like how fast or like how hard do you think OpenAI is like working to fix these? And or like what do you think the time frame is for most of these like exploits going away? Like,
Right.
Is this like months? Is this like years?
Definitely neither. I feel like it's quicker than that. But again, like I don't personally know anyone at OpenAI working on this stuff, but in my unprofessional opinion, it looks bad on OpenAI if they have like these quote unquote jailbreaks that survive for like a long time. So like people have found like exploits that go away pretty soon. I am almost sure it's on a chat level, like it's from like chat GPT instead of like restrictions on the model itself. So they're able to act relatively fast, on like determining like, oh, this is maybe like not a great like input to have an output for. And then they can put in, the like, sorry, we can't, OpenAI is not allowed to answer that question type like response.
So you think they're putting like another AI model in front of the LLM to like classify it as a malicious?
Maybe. I think that's one way of doing it. I think that may actually be likely because it's like a really easy way to determine like, is this bad input or good input, and then put in like responses from the actual model. I am actually very curious as to how like ChatGPT does filtering, but they are doing some amount of it, so that's like it would just be like adding to that for like a new exploit per se. Yeah. What's up?
I know that they were like saying that each input and like they're continuously updating their model based off of the user input. So I know that like people have been messing around with being like 2 + 2 = like 5 and stuff like that.
Right.
So how did they like guard against like?
That's a great question. I think it's so. This is actually pretty like this is the way they train the original model as well. It's RLHF, so reinforcement learning with feedback. So they probably just have like some amount of human feedback that's like sanitizing against bad input necessarily, where it's like, no, 2 + 2 isn't 5. But they also have a ton of data scraped from all over the internet. So like trivial things like that probably wouldn't make it like it wouldn't be weighted as highly against, the entire internet being like 2 + 2 is 4. So like there's some amount of weighting of, all the data they've already received against like maybe malicious actors. But data poisoning is a very real area of concern for like training these types of models. It's, like I talked about it with GANs, but it's definitely a problem with LLMs as well, where it's like, if you have poison data, your model's now wrong, and now you have to go find that data and retrain, which is a pain. So like dealing with data poisoning is definitely like, again, an area of AI security to some degree, which is definitely very interesting to look at. Cool. If no one has any more questions, we're pretty close to ending anyways, so thanks for listening to me, y'all.